Okay, let's get you caught up on what's happening around the world today. We've got quite a range of stories breaking.
We really do. Starting in the Vatican, preparations are moving ahead for the conclave to elect the next pope, kicking off May 7th.
And quite a few cardinals involved this time.
That's right, 133 cardinals under the age of 80. And, what's really interesting is that Pope Francis appointed about 80% of them.
So his legacy really looms large here.
Absolutely. His focus on the poor, the marginalized, decentralizing power, that's the backdrop. Plus, you've got first-time representation from places like Cape Verde, Haiti, South Sudan, reflecting a really diverse church now.
Different priorities depending on where you are in the world, I imagine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Europe's dealing with shrinking congregations, while Africa and Asia are more focused on social issues, poverty, conflict. And while Francis had a huge global influence, 50 million Twitter followers, there was also some, let's say, confusion about implementing his vision on things like lay involvement, LGBT plus Catholics, women's roles.
So divisions exist, but the overall mood is for, what, continuity?
It seems that way. There's a sense that most want to build on what he achieved, despite the pushback from some traditionalists.
Okay. Let's shift over to North America. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney met President Trump.
Yes, their first meeting since Carney's election. And apparently Trump floated the idea of Canada becoming the 51st U.S. state.
Seriously, how did Carney respond?
Pretty firmly, said Canada is not for sale ever. Likened it to selling the Oval Office or Buckingham Palace.
Right, and the ongoing issue of tariffs came up too.
It did. Carney pushed for lifting the U.S. tariffs on steel, aluminum, cars, the whole lot. Trump seemed willing to talk, but no promises were made.
Despite these disagreements and Carney's past criticisms of Trump, the tone was okay.
Reportedly cordial, yes. They actually exchanged some praise. Carney lauded Trump on focusing on the American worker, border security, NATO. And Trump congratulated Carney on his election win, calling it a great comeback.
But Carney did ask him to stop with the 51st state suggestions.
He did. It's a significant relationship. Those $760 billion in goods traded last year alone.
Huge numbers. All right, across the Atlantic now to Germany, a new chancellor.
Yes, Friedrich Merz. But it wasn't smooth sailing. He actually failed the first parliamentary vote.
That's unusual, isn't it?
Unprecedented in post-war Germany, actually. Fell 6 votes short of the absolute majority. Caused a bit of uncertainty. Was it dissent from his own conservatives or the coalition partners, the Social Democrats?
But he got there in the second vote.
He did. Got 325 votes, a majority of 9. The coalition technically has 328 seats, so it was still tight. He's been sworn in now.
Any idea why that initial hiccup happened?
Speculation, really. Maybe some MPs hoping for cabinet posts, maybe some younger Social Democrats had reservations. The SPD leadership denied any organized dissent, though, but it definitely raised eyebrows, especially with the far-right AfD immediately calling for fresh elections.
So Merz finally achieves his long-held ambition. What's he promising?
To boost Germany's global voice, revive the economy, the usual pledges after taking office. This follows the collapse of the previous traffic light coalition overspending.
Okay. Staying with international relations, but focused on trade, UK and India.
Yes, they've finally agreed on a trade deal after 3 years of talks. The UK government's calling it Landmark, their biggest post-Brexit bilateral deal.
What's the main focus?
Increasing exports for UK firms, think whiskey, cars, and cutting taxes on Indian exports coming to the UK, like clothing and footwear.
Any changes to immigration rules, student visas, that sort of thing?
No, the deal specifically states no changes there. It's projected to add about $25.5 billion a year to trade by 2040.
So benefits for consumers too, potentially. Cheaper Indian goods.
That's the idea. Lower tariffs on clothing, footwear, even some foodstuffs and jewelry. And for UK exporters, tariffs on things like gin and whiskey going to India will be halved, though still high at 75%. And tariffs on higher value cars will drop significantly.
Sounds quite comprehensive. Services involved too.
Yes, provisions for the services sector and procurement opportunities are included. Business groups seem pretty happy, calling it a beacon of hope for free trade.
Let's turn to the Middle East now. Reports of an Israeli strike in Yemen.
That's right. The Israeli military said it fully disabled Sana'a airport, which is controlled by the Houthis.
Why now?
It was framed as retaliation for a Houthi missile strike near Israel's main airport. Strikes apparently hit civilian planes, the departures hall, the runway, and a military base nearby.
Casualties reported?
The Houthis reported at least 3 killed and vowed to respond. Israel had previously struck Hudaydah port as well, Prime Minister Netanyahu warned anyone targeting Israel would be held accountable.
And the Houthis.
They're calling the attacks failed terrorism and say their support for Gaza continues. The IDF claims the airport was used for weapons transfers. There are conflicting reports about U.S. involvement, which the U.S. denies.
Okay. Now, a really difficult story concerning migration routes in Africa.
Yes, focusing on a tragic drowning on Lake Turkana. It highlights a dangerous new digital route smugglers are using to get migrants towards Kenya, avoiding increased road patrols.
So they're using the lake now?
Increasingly, yes. A smuggler confirmed this, saying they use rickety boats on the lake, often overloaded, facing strong winds. It's incredibly dangerous.
This specific incident involved Eritrean refugees.
Yes. An eyewitness described the boat carrying a young woman named Hiab capsizing, killing 7 people. Many Eritreans are fleeing military conscription and persecution. Kenya and Uganda have become key destinations or transit points, especially with conflicts elsewhere.
And the conditions for migrants who make it are still terrible.
Often, yes. Reports of overcrowded holding houses in Nairobi, migrants paying for rent and food, even deaths from hunger, and horrible accounts of sexual abuse.
A truly desperate situation. Shifting back to Europe, the EU and Russian energy.
Right, the European Commission has published a roadmap to completely end reliance on Russian energy by the end of 2027.
All Russian energy. Gas, oil, everything.
The immediate focus is a ban on all Russian gas and LNG imports. They're saying no more will we permit Russia to weaponize energy against us.
How's Russia reacting?
The Kremlin spokesperson said Europe is shooting itself in the foot. The EU plan involves legislation requiring national phase-out plans, focusing on efficiency, renewables, and finding other suppliers.
They've already reduced dependence quite a bit since 2022, haven't they?
Significantly, yes, but they still took in about 19% of their gas, 3% of oil, and over 14% of uranium from Russia this year, so it's still a major task.
Okay. A different kind of story from France now, involving wildlife.
Yes. An 81-year-old hunter received a suspended sentence and a fine for killing an endangered brown bear in the Pyrenees back in 2021.
He claimed self-defense.
He did, said the bear attacked him during a boar hunt. But the key thing is the shooting happened outside the authorized hunting area in a nature reserve. 15 other hunters were also fined collectively for damages.
This relates to the bear reintroduction program there.
Exactly. Bear numbers have been slowly climbing since the 90s, now estimated at around 96 in the Pyrenees. So killing one, especially an endangered one, is a serious issue.
Let's move to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Accusations of a drone attack on Moscow.
Yes, Russia accused Ukraine of launching drones at Moscow, just days before a planned ceasefire for the WW2 victory parade. Moscow's airports were briefly shut down.
Any casualties? And has Ukraine responded?
No reported casualties, and Ukraine hasn't commented officially. Russia says it intercepted 19 drones. This comes as Putin announced a 3-day ceasefire for May 8th, which President Zelensky dismissed as a theatrical play.
So no ceasefire agreement.
Doesn't look like it. Ukraine wants a longer truce and says it can't guarantee safety in Moscow for the parade. Meanwhile, both sides were reporting drone attacks and strikes elsewhere, with casualties reported. Fighting continues.
A grim situation. Now to South America, Peru. A curfew imposed.
Yes, in Pataz province. This follows the horrific discovery of the bodies of 13 mine workers who had been kidnapped late last month.
Kidnapped? By whom?
The mine owner, La Poderosa, blames illegal miners colluding with criminals. Mining activities are suspended for a month, and extra security forces are being sent in.
This isn't the first incident of violence there.
No. La Poderosa says 39 people linked to the company have been killed by criminal gangs in Pataz recently. A state of emergency declared earlier this year apparently had little effect.
What happened to these kidnapped workers?
They worked for a subcontractor. They were reportedly ambushed, trying to regain control of the mine. Forensic evidence suggests they were shot point blank, maybe a week before their bodies were found. Prosecutors are calling it a war for mining pits.
Truly shocking. Let's turn to a dispute over historical artifacts. India and Sotheby's.
India is demanding that Sotheby's in Hong Kong halt an auction of jewels linked to Buddha's remains.
Jewels linked to Buddha. How?
They were found buried with bone fragments believed to be Buddha's over a century ago, excavated in India in 1898. India says they're sacred relics, inalienable cultural heritage, and selling them violates national and international laws.
But Sotheby's is proceeding.
They are. The jewels ended up partly with the executor's family. The great-grandson, Chris Pepe, is putting them up for auction. He claims they're a small portion of duplicates. though India disputes that term.
So India wants them returned and is threatening legal action.
Yes, demanding a public apology, too. Pepe argues the auction is the fairest way to transfer them to Buddhists, as donation options apparently had issues. These gems have been exhibited widely, including at the Met.
A really complex situation. Back to ongoing conflicts, Sudan.
More violence there. Drone strikes hit a major power station in Port Sudan, causing a complete power outage. Explosions were also reported near the main airport.
This is the paramilitary RSF targeting Port Sudan.
Yes, for the third day running.
Mhm.
Port Sudan had been relatively spared before this. The power outage is hitting water, health, other services. The UN temporarily suspended aid flights.
This is a dangerous escalation.
The African Union certainly thinks so, warning about the threat to civilians and regional stability. The RSF seems to be increasingly using drones. This war has been going on for 2 years now, causing a massive humanitarian crisis.
Staying with difficult subjects, as the Vatican prepares for the conclave, Pope Francis's legacy on handling clergy sexual abuse is being questioned.
It is. While he's acknowledged for recognizing victims and bringing in some reforms, many survivors feel he didn't go nearly far enough.
What are the main criticisms?
That the changes didn't mandate reporting abuse to police, that the church still practices too much secrecy, and that there hasn't been full disclosure or real accountability for cover-ups.
You have examples like the Cardinal Law case in Boston.
Exactly. Files showed he knew about an abusive priest but sought to move him quietly. Law later resigned from Boston but got a prominent Vatican role. Survivors like Alexa McPherson, abused from age 3, see these patterns and feel, as her lawyer put it, nothing really has changed.
So, despite Francis's actions like the 2019 conference and revising secrecy rules, there's still deep pain and a feeling of insufficient reform.
Deep pain, yes, and little hope among many survivors for more comprehensive change from the institution.
Okay, let's lighten the mood slightly. Some celebrity news.
Yes, Rihanna confirmed she's expecting her 3rd child. She announced it at the Met Gala in New York.
She has a history of high-profile pregnancy announcements, doesn't she?
She does. First one in 2022, second at the Super Bowl halftime show last year. Seems the Met Gala is becoming a popular spot for these reveals.
Speaking of big events, there's also been testimony in that Australian mushroom poisoning case.
That's right. Ian Wilkinson, the sole surviving guest from that deadly lunch, testified. He described being invited with his wife by Aaron Patterson for a meal of beef Wellington.
That meal tragically led to 3 deaths.
Yes, his wife Heather and Don and Gail Patterson. Mr. Wilkinson himself was critically ill. The lunch contained death cap mushrooms. Aaron Patterson is on trial for murder and attempted murder.
What did Mr. Wilkinson say about the meal itself?
He said Mrs. Patterson plated all the food. He recalled she was definitely eating, but wasn't sure how much. He also mentioned that after lunch, Mrs. Patterson falsely claimed she had cancer.
And the defense.
They argue it was a tragic accident, though they admit she lied to police initially out of panic. The core issue is whether she intended to kill or seriously harm them.
Okay, back to the Middle East. More Israeli strikes in Yemen.
Yes, Israel confirmed hitting Houthi targets again, just a day after the Sana'a airport strike we mentioned.
Where are these latest strikes?
They targeted Hudaydah port, calling it a central supply source, and the Bajil cement factory, which Israel claims was used for tunnels and infrastructure. Again, this was framed as retaliation for the Houthi missile attack near Ben Gurion Airport.
And the Houthi response.
They claimed 21 people were injured in Monday's attacks, calling it joint U.S.-Israeli aggression. The U.S. again denied involvement. Iran called the Houthi airport attack an independent decision.
Meanwhile, in the Israel-Gaza conflict, Israel's Security Cabinet has reportedly approved a significant plan.
Yes. Reports suggest they've approved a plan to expand the military offensive, including the capture of Gaza and holding its territory.
Capturing Gaza. What does that entail?
Netanyahu spoke of a forceful operation to destroy Hamas and rescue hostages. He said Gaza's population will be moved to protect it, but didn't specify how much territory would be held long-term. Far-right Minister Smotrich was blunter, saying Israel is going to finally occupy the Gaza Strip.
What about humanitarian aid?
The cabinet also approved, in principle, aid delivery through private companies, ending a 2-month blockade. However, the UN and aid agencies strongly oppose this, calling it a breach of humanitarian principles and saying they won't cooperate under those conditions.
How are others reacting? Hamas? hostage families.
Hamas rejected it as pressure and blackmail. The Hostages and Missing Families Forum expressed concern the plan prioritizes territory over rescuing the hostages. Palestinians in North Gaza are obviously opposed to being forcibly displaced again.
This sounds like a major potential shift. Let's switch gears to economic news tariffs.
Yes, warnings coming from big U.S. companies like Ford and Mattel about the costs of U.S. tariffs, particularly potential new ones on Chinese goods.
How high could these tariffs go?
The Trump administration's plans could see combined tariffs reach 245% on some Chinese goods. China has already retaliated with 125% taxes on U.S. products.
So companies are worried about prices going up for consumers.
That's the main concern. Mattel also pointed out they import from other Asian countries that face paused tariffs. Trump acknowledged the potential impact, but argued China would suffer more.
Political instability seems to be a theme today. What's happening in Romania?
Quite a bit of turmoil. The Eurosceptic candidate, George Simion, did very well in Sunday's vote, winning nearly 41%. He's expected to win the runoff against the liberal Bucharest mayor.
And this caused the government to fall?
Yes. Prime Minister Marcel Ciolacu resigned, saying his pro-EU coalition lacked legitimacy after their candidate failed. A caretaker PM has been appointed, but Romania faces political instability.
What's driving Simion's success?
A lot of frustration, apparently linked to annulled presidential elections. He admires Trump, wants an EU of sovereign nations, opposes sending weapons to Ukraine, and campaigned heavily against financial support for Ukrainian refugees. Analysts see it as a radical manifestation of hostility towards the establishment.
Interesting. Now, a story connecting Rwanda and the U.S.
Rwanda confirmed it's in early stage talks with the Trump administration about potentially accepting migrants deported by the U.S.
This fits with Trump's focus on speeding up removals.
It does. Other countries like El Salvador, Panama, and Costa Rica have taken in U.S. deportees before, sometimes for a fee. Rwanda says it's open to taking more migrants.
But there are human rights concerns about Rwanda, aren't there?
There are. Critics point to Rwanda's own human rights record and the risks involved in such arrangements, although Rwanda maintains it's a safe place for refugees.
Speaking of President Trump, he's brought up an old idea again.
Yes, reopening Alcatraz prison and expanding it.
Alcatraz. But it's a museum, a tourist attraction.
It is. Closes the prison back in 1963. Trump seems to think reopening it could house dangerous inmates and be a symbol of law and order.
Is that realistic?
Experts say refurbishment is not realistic at all. The place is apparently rusting and rotting. It was incredibly expensive to run, even back then, and the buildings have major structural problems, lack modern security, small cells.
So, huge costs involved.
Potentially much higher per inmate than current federal prisons. Plus, its maximum capacity was only around 340 prisoners. The Justice Department did say the Bureau of Prisons is working towards rebuilding and opening Alcatraz, but the hurdles seem immense.
Okay, an issue closer to home for U.S. travelers' air traffic control.
Yes, an incident at Newark Airport on April 28th where controllers briefly lost contact with planes, couldn't see, hear, or talk to them.
How long did that last?
Transportation Secretary Duffy said about 30 seconds. The primary communication line went down, and the backup apparently failed too.
That must have been stressful for the controllers.
Extremely. It led to multiple employees taking trauma leave, which then contributed to flight delays and cancellations. The FAA acknowledged the antiquated air traffic control system is affecting the workforce. United Airlines had already cut flights due to Newark's issues.
This comes amid efforts to boost controller numbers.
Yes, the DOT just unveiled a plan for that, although the Trump administration also began firing some FAA employees earlier this year. Secretary Duffy plans to seek billions for infrastructure and staffing reform.
Another potential policy from the Trump administration causing waves tariffs on movies.
Yes, he's floated the idea of 100% tariffs on movies not made in the U.S. He initially said the U.S. film industry was dying a very fast death, though he later softened that, saying he'll meet with the industry.
Why the focus on movies?
He framed it as messaging and propaganda, wanting movies made in America again. It taps into the trend of productions moving overseas for cost savings.
How would this even work? It sounds complicated.
The details are very unclear. Would it apply to U.S. companies filming abroad? Streaming services, how would you calculate it? A non-U.S. union called it a potential knockout blow.
What's the reaction been?
Industry bodies like the UK union BEC2 warned of damage. The UK government stressed collaboration. Film critics worry about retaliation from other countries. Places like Australia, Canada, and the UK have benefited from attracting productions.
Okay. Now for a rather unique humanitarian story involving the Pope.
Yes, one of Pope Francis's Pope-mobiles is being converted into a mobile health clinic for children in Gaza.
The actual vehicle he used.
One he used in Bethlehem in 2014, yes. Caritas is refitting it with medical equipment. Rapid tests, suture kits, oxygen vaccines, a fridge for medicines. The Vatican called it the Pope's final wish for the children of Gaza.
Will it be able to get into Gaza?
It's currently in Bethlehem, ready to go if and when a humanitarian corridor opens. The aim is to reach children cut off from health care in a region devastated by war, where UNICEF reports critical shortages.
A powerful symbol.
Caritas said, "It's not just a vehicle, it's a message that the world has not forgotten." Pope Francis has spoken frequently about the war, calling the situation shameful.
Let's return to the war in Ukraine, specifically the human cost for Russia.
New analysis suggests 2024 was the deadliest year yet for Russian forces in Ukraine since the full-scale invasion began.
Deadlier than 2022 or 2023.
Yes, significantly. At least 45,287 Russian military personnel confirmed killed in 2024. That's almost 3 times the number in 2022 and exceeds the losses in 2023.
What's driving this increase?
A steady month-on-month increase as the front lines slowly move forward. Estimates suggest Russia lost about 27 lives for every square kilometer captured in 2024. The data comes from open-source tracking by journalists and volunteers.
So relentless, bloody battles with very high casualties for small gains.
That seems to be the picture. Heavy losses were reported during advances in the east between September and November 2024, for instance. And the actual total losses are likely much higher, potentially over 112,000 fatalities in 2024 if confirmed deaths represent only 40% of the total.
How is Russia sustaining these losses?
Through increased recruitment in the second half of the year, offering large sign-up bonuses and high combat salaries, many volunteers, including some avoiding prosecution, form a large part of the casualties, often with minimal training.
All right, let's end with something lighter. The Met Gala.
Always a spectacle. The annual fashion event in New York. This year's theme was super fine, tailoring black style, inspired by an exhibit on the Black Dandy.
Any standout looks?
Oh, plenty. Zendaya in a white suit, Kim Kardashian in black leather, Lewis Hamilton in a cream suit, Chappell Roan in hot pink, Demi Moore dressed as, well, a literal tie, Rihanna's pregnancy reveal, Diana Ross, Sydney Sweeney, Dua Lipa. The list goes on. Lots of creativity on display. Usher, Madonna, Andre 3000 with a piano. Quite the night.
Sounds like it. Okay, one final story, circling back to trade tensions, this time focusing on India and China.
Yes, concerns are growing in India about cheaper Chinese goods flooding their market, particularly textiles like viscose yarn.
Why is this happening now?
It seems linked to President Trump's high tariffs on Chinese goods going to the U.S. Chinese manufacturers are looking for alternative markets, and India is feeling the impact. Local Indian producers say they just can't compete with the prices.
So Indian mills are slowing down.
Some are, yes. Nearly 50 small mills in South India reportedly slowed production. It's not just textiles. There are anxieties across metals, chemicals, basically sectors where China faces U.S. tariffs.
India relies on China for a lot of materials, though, right?
Heavily, yes. Raw materials, intermediate goods. India's trade deficit with China has ballooned to $100 billion as imports surge. There's been a record number of WTO complaints against China this year, many from India.
What's India doing about it?
They're tracking cheap Chinese goods, probing the viscose yarn situation, and recently imposed a tax on some steel imports. But government plans to boost local manufacturing haven't fully taken off yet, partly because Indian companies are hesitant to invest, fearing they'll just be swamped by China.
A real dilemma.
Definitely. How to manage this trade imbalance and protect local industry without disrupting necessary supply chains. It's a major challenge for India right now.
So today we've touched on everything from papal elections and international diplomacy to trade wars, conflict zones, and even high fashion. A real whirlwind.
It really shows you how interconnected everything is, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Actions in one part of the world ripple outwards, affecting economies, politics, and, well, people's lives everywhere.
Absolutely. As you think about these stories, perhaps consider where that balance lies between national interests and global cooperation, especially when facing such widespread challenges.